All right, let's jump right into a topic that's, well, it's pretty complex and definitely controversial: the ethics of human enhancement. For all of human history, the traits we get, whether we're tall, short, musically inclined, whatever, it's all been up to a kind of natural lottery, right? Pure chance. But now, for the very first time, technology is handing us the power to go from that roll of the dice to making a conscious choice. And that raises some of the biggest, most profound questions we've ever had to ask ourselves.
So, here's our game plan. First, we're going to tackle that really loaded word eugenics. Then we'll get into the case for enhancement, look at the incredibly tough choices and dilemmas that come with it, and wrap up by thinking about this huge shift from chance to choice.
Okay, first up, eugenics. Look, just hearing that word makes most of us cringe, and for some very, very good reasons. I mean, its history is tied to some of the absolute worst things that happened in the 20th century. But if we're going to have an honest conversation about the modern debate, we have to start with where the word came from and how its meaning has changed over time.
So the term itself was actually coined by Francis Galton, who, fun fact, was Charles Darwin's cousin. And his original idea was really a two-part thing. First, it was about the science of it all, just studying heredity. But the second part was this moral idea that we should use what we learn to improve the traits of future generations, all with the goal of making life better for everyone.
And this is where things get really, really important. We have to draw a sharp line between two very different ideas. On one side, you have classical eugenics. This is the stuff of nightmares, right? State-sponsored, totally coercive, often deeply racist, and it led to horrors like forced sterilization and even genocide. But on the other side, there's a modern concept that bioethicists talk about, called liberal eugenics. And this is a whole different ballgame. It's built on individual choice, it's non-coercive, and it's all about parents making decisions for the well-being of their own child, using tech like IVF and embryo selection.
Now, here's a mind-bending idea from philosophers like Philip Kitcher. They argue that once these technologies exist, we can't actually avoid making some kind of eugenic choice. Think about it. The decision to not use genetic screening, to just leave it all up to chance, that's still a choice. And it's a choice that has a real impact on what kind of people get born. So the question isn't if we're going to influence the next generation, it's how.
Okay, so now that we've made that crucial distinction, let's switch gears and really dig into the arguments for enhancement. I mean, why would anyone choose this? What's the thinking that might lead parents to feel not just like they can make these choices, but maybe that they even should?
So a central idea here is something called procreative beneficence. It sounds complicated, but the core idea put forward by philosopher Julian Savulescu is pretty simple. It says that parents have a moral reason to pick the child out of the possible children they could have who's likely to have the best shot at a great life. It's basically taking that instinct we all have that parents should do what's best for their kids, like giving them good food or a good education, and applying it to the genetic level.
And the argument doesn't stop with just one kid's well-being. It gets bigger. Proponents point to what they call network effects. Think of it like this. Having one phone is useless, but when everyone has one, they become incredibly valuable. The idea is that some traits, like intelligence, work the same way. It's not just about one person being smarter, it's that a society with a higher average cognitive ability might lead to more cooperation, more trust, less corruption, and just better-run institutions for everyone. It's that whole "a rising tide lifts all boats" idea.
But let's be real. It is absolutely not that simple, because these incredible new powers bring with them some of the heaviest, most complicated ethical problems humanity has ever had to wrestle with.
For starters, where on earth do we draw the line between treatment and enhancement? I mean, it sounds easy, right? Groups like the American Medical Association say we should only use this stuff for therapy. But think about it. If you edit a gene to prevent a predisposition to severe depression, is that a treatment or an enhancement? What about fixing crooked teeth? Is that therapy or just cosmetic? A lot of thinkers argue that this line is way, way blurrier than it seems, and maybe not even the most important moral line to draw.
And that brings us to another huge problem. What happens when everyone starts chasing the same enhancements? This gets into something economists call the problem of positional goods.
Okay, so what's a positional good? Height is the perfect example. Being tall can give you an edge, right? But what if every parent could choose to make their kid a few inches taller? Well, pretty soon, the average height just goes up. Nobody is tall anymore, relatively speaking. No one has gained an advantage, but everyone's had to pay for the technology. You can see how this could create a kind of social arms race, parents feeling like they have to enhance their kids just to keep them from falling behind. It's a race to the top where nobody actually gets ahead.
Then you have the trade-offs, and this is a big one. It turns out there's really no such thing as a perfect personality trait. Take a look at this. Being really high in openness is great for creativity, but it also has a slight link to things like delusional thinking. Being super agreeable makes you empathetic and trustworthy, but it can also make you a target for people who want to take advantage. The point is, there's no simple dial you can turn to best human. It's always a balancing act, and that makes the choices incredibly complex.
And beyond all the individual choices, we have to remember that these decisions send a message to the rest of society. This gets to something called the expressivist objection, which is a really powerful point often raised by disability advocates. The question is this: if parents start choosing against having a child with a condition like, say, deafness, what does that say about the lives of deaf people who are alive right now? Does it imply their lives are less valuable or less worth living? It's a really tough, sensitive question about identity, diversity, and what it truly means to value every kind of human life.
So when you put all of this together, the arguments for it, the really hard dilemmas, it all points in one direction. We are standing on the edge of a monumental shift in what it means to be human. We're moving from a world where our biology was left to random chance to one where it's becoming a matter of deliberate choice.
And, this anxiety isn't new. Not at all. Over 150 years ago, Charles Darwin himself was worried about this. He wrote that civilized society, with all its medicine and support systems, was basically stopping natural selection in its tracks. Now, his language sounds pretty jarring to us today, for sure, but that core concern, what are the long-term genetic consequences of our choices, that same question is right at the heart of today's debate.
And really, that's what this all boils down to. For every second of human history, our genetics have been a lottery, a roll of the dice. But now, we're building the tools to trade in that lottery ticket for a blueprint. This isn't just another new gadget. This is a fundamental change in our relationship with our own biology. It's the difference between being passengers in the car of evolution and grabbing the steering wheel.
Which leaves us with the biggest question of all. Let's face it, the genetic lottery is not fair. It can be cruel. It deals out terrible diseases and huge disadvantages completely at random. But as we start to take control, are we actually wise enough to do a better job? Can our choices, with all our human biases, our social inequalities, our passing fads, really build a better future than the blind, random process that got us here? That is the enormous question we as a species are now facing.